Hello to everyone, it's me Dr. Faisal from Medicos. Today we will start Microbiology 1 Levinson and we will start it line by line in short episodes. So first we will cover basic bacteriology and clinical bacteriology, then basic virology and then clinical virology and then mycology and so on. So the very first we will cover basic bacteriology. So in the very first topic, in the very first basic bacteriology, in part 1 basic bacteriology, we will cover the chapter 1 bacteria compared with other microorganisms. So before starting the microbes that cause infectious diseases, we must know that there are 5 major groups that are infectious agent, which is the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, virus and helminths. So these are the 5 major groups which can cause infection. So we will study it line by line. So the agent of human infectious diseases belong to 5 major groups of organisms: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, helminths and viruses. Bacteria belong to bacteria domain, whereas fungi, yeast and molds, protozoa and helminths, worm are classified in eukaryotes domain. So protists and fungi are distinguished from animals and plants by being either unicellular or relatively simple multicellular organism. In contrast, helminths are complex multicellular organism. Viruses are quite distinct from other organisms. They are non-cellular, that is, they do not have nucleus and cytoplasm, cannot make their own energy, and are unable to synthesize proteins. They are comparatively relevant upon host cell for replication and thus considered obligate intracellular pathogens. So we study here that there are 5 major groups of infectious agent, and in these bacteria is present in the bacterial domain, in prokaryotic domain, while the remaining fungi, protista, virus, helminths is put in the eukaryotic domains, and the very last we study that they are completely relevant upon host cell for replication and thus considered. So they are completely depend on their host cells. And what is obligate intracellular pathogen? Obligate intracellular pathogen are those parasite pathogens which are capable of growing inside the cell. So important feature of microbes. The important feature of microbes is, like many of essential characteristics of this organism are described in table 1 to 2. One silent feature is that bacteria, fungi, protozoa and helminths are cellular, whereas viruses are not. This distinction is based primarily on 3 criteria: their structure, their method of replication, and their nature of nucleic acid. So their structure cell wall have nucleus or nucleate below, like we will see here there below, which contain DNA. This is surrounded by cytoplasm, where proteins are synthesized and energy is generated. So viruses have inner core of genetic material, either DNA or RNA, but no cytoplasm, and so they depend on host cell to provide the machinery for protein synthesis and energy generation. So the second method is method of replication. Cells replicate either by binary fission or by mitosis, during which one parent cells divide into make 2 progeny cells while retaining its cellular structure. Prokaryotic cells, bacteria, replicate by binary fission, and whereas eukaryotic cells, this is the prokaryotic cell which can replicate by binary fission, while eukaryotic cell is replicated by mitosis. And in contrast, viruses produce many copies of their nucleic acid and proteins, and they are assembled into multiple progeny viruses. Furthermore, viruses must replicate with their host cells. Provide the mentions previously, they lack protein synthesis and energy generating system, with the exception of rickettsia and chlamydia, which also require living host cell for growth. Bacteria can replicate extracellularly. And the other one is like nature of the nucleic acid. Like cells contain both DNA and RNA, whereas viruses contain either DNA or RNA, but not both. Cells. So in this method of replication, we studied that the bacteria is divided by binary fission, while the eukaryotes are divided by mitosis. And we know that bacteria, with the exception of rickettsia and chlamydia, they cannot replicate outside the cell. So they must need cell host cell to replicate inside the cell. And in the nature of nucleic acid, we studied that cell contain both DNA and RNA, whereas virus contain either DNA or RNA, but not both. Like in eukaryotic cell, there must be DNA and RNA, while in all like viruses which must not have both DNA or RNA, like they must have only one, either DNA or RNA. So about this we will study like this is first look here to this table, that in this table we will study, like we are studying here, like here is domain, kingdom, pathogen, microorganism, and types of cells. So like animals, domain is eukarya, protists eukarya, fungi eukarya, and prokaryotes, of course bacteria. While their kingdom, their pathogen organisms is what? Their pathogen organism is like, for animal helminthes, protista is protozoa and fungi, yeast and molds, and prokaryotes is bacteria, viruses. And the types of cell, like for animal helminthes, of course it is eukaryotes, and prokaryotes it is in bacteria it is eukaryotes, while viruses is non-cellular. This is not considered it in any kingdom. And eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Now here is comparison about the eukaryotes and prokaryotes. So cells have evolved into two fundamentally different types of eukaryotes and prokaryotes, which can be distinguished based on their structure and on the complexity of their organism. So fungi, protozoa, helminthes are eukaryotes, whereas bacteria are prokaryotes. And the eukaryote cells have true nucleus, as we know that U means true and karyans means nucleus. So the cells have true nucleus, so it is eukaryotes, and chromosomes surrounded by the nuclear membrane, and uses a mitotic apparatus to ensure equal allocation of the chromosomes to progeny cells. So number 2 is the nuclei of prokaryote cells, and prokaryotes, pro means false and karyans means nucleus. So those organisms which have false nucleus, which haven't true nucleus, which will be considered it as prokaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cell typically consist of the single cellular organisms, single cellular molecules of loosely organized DNA, and lack of nuclear membrane and mitotic apparatus. So in addition to the different types of nuclei, the two classes cells are distinguished by several other characteristics. So number 1, eukaryotic cell contain organelles such as mitochondria, lysosome, and larger 80S ribosomes, whereas prokaryotes contain no organelles. This point must note it, that eukaryote cell contain organelles and double membranous organelles. So mitochondria and lysosome and large 80S ribosome, while prokaryotes, they are talking about here prokaryotes. So prokaryotes have no organelles and smaller 70S ribosome. It is the main difference. And number 2 is most prokaryotes have a rigid external cell wall that contain peptidoglycan. And we know about these prokaryotes that it have external cell wall, very rigid external cell wall. Why? Because of cellulose. Peptidoglycan is also called as cellulose. And this peptidoglycan is made up from amino acid and from the glycan, sugar molecule, a polymer of the amino acid and sugar. So the amino acid made from the protein and made from the N-acetylmuramic acid and N-acetyl glucosamine, and these are the sugar molecule basically, and also amino acid. But and here as it unique structure component, eukaryotes on the other hand do not contain peptidoglycan. Either they are bound by a flexible cell membrane, or in the case of fungi they have a rigid cell wall with chitin homopolymer of N-acetylglucosamine, which I said that N-acetylglucosamine and N-acetylmuramic acid also typically forming the framework. And the eukaryotic cell membrane contains sterol, whereas the no prokaryotic cell except the wall-less mycoplasma have sterol in its membrane. So here is the basic thing, that if someone asks that in bacteria which type of sterol is present, so we must answer that no prokaryotes have sterols. Only one prokaryotes, which is mycoplasma, having no cell wall, they have sterols. And while the remaining all eukaryotic cell have sterol, contain their sterol in S. If you talk about our we human being, we have sterol in the form of cholesterol. And if you talk about prokaryote, they have no sterol, but except one is mycoplasma. Mycoplasma is those type of bacteria which have no cell wall, but instead cell wall they have sterol. Sterol, what do sterol to this? It give its rigidity, because if they have no cell wall, so of course due to osmotic pressure they must be burst out, but Allah Almighty give the sterol, and this sterol is present in the mycoplasma. And we know that like in human, sterol is cholesterol, and fungi, we have in fungi which type of sterol? Ergosterol is present. So now we will talk about the motility. The motility is another characteristic by which this organism can be distinguished. Most protozoa and some bacteria are motile, whereas fungi and viruses are non-motile. And the protozoa are a heterogeneous group of possesses three different organs of locomotion: flagella, cilia, and pseudopods. About flagella, cilia, and pseudopod, by which it can move. The motile bacteria move only by means of flagella. We know this is simple, as no rocket science. So terminology: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and helminthes are named according to the binomial lineage system. Like binomial lineage system is those system which give a name as, like we know, like our human name is biological name of human is has Homo sapien. So Homo means genus and sapien means like Homo come from genus, and sapien is a species. And like that is it is the binomial lineage system that uses genus and species. For example, regarding the name of the like we study here that it uses genus and species. Homo sapien, Homo is genus and sapien is species. For example, regarding the name of the well-known bacteria Escherichia coli. So Escherichia is genus and coli is species. Here, watch. The Escherichia is the genus and coli is the species name. Similarly, the name of the yeast Candida albicans. So Candida is is genus and albicans is species. So consist of Candida is a genus and albicans is a species. Viruses typically have a single name, such as poliovirus, but viruses have a single name, have no such such complex name like genus, species. Viruses have just simple, typically have a single name, such as poliovirus, measles virus, rabies virus, coronavirus, etc. And some viruses have names with two words, such as herpes simplex virus, but these do not represent genus and species. Like in virus, there is no such concept of genus and species. So about this table, we must study this table that about they are compared the prokaryotes with eukaryotes. So DNA within the nuclear membrane, we know that in prokaryote there is no nuclear membrane. So there is no, and eukaryote there is, yes, nuclear membrane is present. And mitotic division, in prokaryotes there is no mitotic division, so division by binary fission here in prokaryotes. And eukaryotes, yes, there is mitotic division. In chromosomes number, here is usually one single, but it is double, it is more than one. And membrane bound organelles such as mitochondria, and of course it have no membrane. Double membranous organelles is not present in prokaryotic cell, while in eukaryotes all double membranous organelles is present. And size of ribosomes is, of course, in prokaryotes it is smaller size 70s, while in eukaryotes is larger size 80s ribosomes. And cell wall containing peptidoglycan is of course it's present in this, but in animal it is not present. So it is the last topic, the pearls, which is the very important. It is basically the fundamental things of each chapter. So we must study the pearl of each and every chapter. So the agent of human infectious diseases are bacteria, fungi, yeast, molds, protozoa, helminthes, and viruses. As I said earlier, that the five major infectious agents. So bacteria cells have a prokaryotic nucleus, whereas human, fungal, protozoan, and helminthes cell have a eukaryotic nucleus. Viruses are not cells but not have a nucleus. Of course, we know that bacteria cell have prokaryotic nucleus, while the human, protozoa, fungi, protozoa, and helminthes, these are eukaryotics. And viruses, we know, of course, it is not cellular. It is not cell and do not have nucleus. If not cell, of course, it have no nucleus. And all cell contain both DNA and RNA, whereas viruses contain either DNA or RNA. And bacteria and fungi cell are surrounded by rigid cell wall, and whereas human protozoan and helminthes cell have a flexible cell membrane. Most bacteria have cell wall that contain peptidoglycans, whereas the fungal cells wall contain chitin. So the bacterial cell wall is made up from peptidoglycan, and fungal cell wall is made up from chitin. And we know about this cell wall, that in this cell wall no bacterial cell wall contains sterol, only mycoplasma. And fungal cell wall contain which type of sterol? Ergosterol. So that was the last topic of that chapter. And the remaining we will be it will be in next episode, the remaining chapter. And thank you for watching. Subscribe my channel for more.